Long before the first Sumerian scribe pressed reed into clay, long before Babylon rose from the desert sands, there existed a people whose memory stretched back to the beginning of time itself. The Yoruba of West Africa held secrets in their oral traditions, secrets that speak of beings who descended from the heavens, who shaped humanity from sacred clay, who brought the knowledge of civilization to a world still young. Tonight, we journey into the forgotten corridors of human memory, where two ancient traditions, separated by thousands of miles, tell remarkably similar stories. Stories of the Anunnaki. Stories that suggest our ancestors remembered something extraordinary. In the middle of the 19th century, beneath the wind-swept mounds of ancient Nineveh, archaeologists began unearthing fragments of a world that had been silent for millennia. Clay tablets covered in strange wedge-shaped marks that would come to be known as cuneiform, humanity's first writing system. And as scholars painstakingly learned to read these ancient inscriptions, they discovered something remarkable: stories of creation, of gods and goddesses, of a time before time when divine beings walked the earth and shaped the destiny of all living things. These tablets, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, emerged from the ruins of great libraries and temple archives across ancient Mesopotamia, from Nippur, the sacred city, from Ur of the Chaldees, from Babylon and Eridu, each fragment adding another piece to a vast cosmic puzzle that the Sumerians had carefully preserved in clay nearly 5,000 years ago. And among the most significant discoveries were the texts describing the Anunnaki, a name that translates roughly as those of princely seed, or the offspring of Anu, referring to a council of divine beings who featured prominently in Sumerian religion and cosmology. In the original tablets, the Anunnaki appear as a pantheon of gods associated with the heavens, the earth, and the underworld, children of An the Sky Father and Ka the Earth Mother. And while modern popular culture has transformed them into ancient astronauts and alien visitors, the scholarly record presents a more nuanced picture of a sophisticated religious system in which these divine beings played specific roles in maintaining cosmic order and interacting with humanity. The Sumerian creation narratives speak of a primordial time when the universe existed in a state of undifferentiated chaos, when the waters of Apsu and Tiamat mingled together in darkness, and from this cosmic void emerged the first gods who would begin the great work of separation and ordering, dividing heaven from earth, light from darkness, establishing the fixed patterns of the stars and the rhythms of the seasons that would govern all life to come. According to these ancient texts, the Anunnaki descended from the heavens to the earth, establishing their first settlement at Eridu in the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, a place the Sumerians considered the oldest city in the world, the point where divine civilization first touched the terrestrial realm. And from this sacred center, the gods began to organize the world, assigning duties and domains, creating the infrastructure of cosmic governance that would eventually require a workforce to maintain. The tablets describe how the lesser gods, those assigned to labor in the fields and canals, eventually grew weary of their endless toil and complained bitterly to the great gods. And in response to this divine labor crisis, Enki the Wise, lord of the sweet waters and master of crafts, proposed a solution that would change everything: the creation of a new being, fashioned from clay and animated with divine essence, a creature called Adamu, or humanity, made to bear the burden of the gods and tend the gardens of earth. This creation narrative, found in texts like the Atrahasis and later echoed in the Babylonian Enuma Elish, presents humanity as a deliberate creation, fashioned with purpose and imbued with something of the divine. And while mainstream scholars interpret these stories as religious mythology, expressing ancient peoples' understanding of their place in the cosmos, others have proposed more literal readings, suggesting that encoded within these clay tablets may be memories of actual events, perhaps transformed and mythologized over countless generations, but retaining some kernel of historical truth. Zecharia Sitchin, whose books have sold millions of copies worldwide, famously argued that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial visitors who genetically engineered humanity as a slave species. And while his translations and interpretations have been widely criticized by academic Assyriologists, his work brought unprecedented popular attention to these ancient texts and raised questions that continue to fascinate millions. We need not accept any particular interpretation to recognize that these tablets preserve something precious, a window into how ancient humans understood their origins, their relationship with the divine, and their purpose in the cosmos. And whether we read them as mythology, as history, or as something in between, they invite us to wonder what experiences, what memories, what truths might lie beneath their carefully crafted symbols. Now let us travel across deserts and savannas, across the vast breadth of the African continent, to the forests and grasslands of what is today southwestern Nigeria, where for countless generations the Yoruba people have preserved their own account of creation, their own memory of divine beings who descended from heaven to establish civilization on earth, a tradition so remarkably parallel to the Sumerian account that its existence demands our careful attention. At the center of Yoruba cosmology stands Olodumare, also known as Olorun, the supreme being, the owner of heaven, the Almighty whose nature transcends all human understanding. And unlike many supreme deities in world religions, Olodumare is not primarily a creator in the direct sense, but rather the source from which all creative power flows, the ultimate authority who delegates the work of creation and governance to a vast assembly of divine intermediaries known as the Orisha. The Orisha, whose number is traditionally given as 401, though this figure represents completeness rather than a precise count, are divine beings who serve as the active agents of Olodumare in the world, each possessing specific domains, characteristics and relationships with humanity, and like the Anunnaki of Sumer, they form a council of gods operating beneath the supreme sky deity, carrying out the complex work of maintaining cosmic order and interacting with human affairs. Here already we encounter our first striking parallel, for both traditions describe a supreme deity associated with the sky and heaven, who does not directly manage earthly affairs, but instead delegates this responsibility to a council of lesser divine beings, a structural similarity that could reflect universal patterns of human religious thinking, or might point to something deeper, some shared memory or common source that we have yet to fully understand. The Yoruba creation narrative, preserved in thousands of verses, memorized and transmitted by the Babalawo, or fathers of secrets across countless generations, tells how in the beginning there was only sky above and water below, and Olodumare looked upon this unformed world and determined that it should be made suitable for life. And so, the Supreme Being summoned the Orisha and assigned to them the sacred task of creation. In the most widely known version of the story, Olodumare dispatched Obatala, the Orisha of wisdom and creativity, to descend from heaven and create solid land upon the waters. And for this purpose, Obatala was given sacred implements, a golden chain by which to climb down from the sky, a snail shell filled with sacred earth, a white hen with 5 toes, and a palm nut, each object carrying profound symbolic meaning in the unfolding drama of creation. Obatala descended on the golden chain, lowering himself from the realm of the Orisha toward the primordial waters below. And when he reached the end of the chain, he poured out the sacred earth from the snail shell and released the 5-toed hen, which immediately began scratching and spreading the earth across the surface of the waters, creating the first solid ground. And where this earth spread and multiplied, there formed the land that would become Ile Ife, the house of spreading, the sacred city, the navel of the world, the Yoruba equivalent of Eridu, where heaven first touched earth. In some versions of the narrative, Obatala is accompanied or preceded by Oduduwa, and there exists creative tension within the tradition about which Orisha ultimately completed the task of creating the land. But in all versions, the essential pattern remains the same: divine beings descending from heaven on Olodumare's command, carrying sacred materials, establishing the first city as the point of contact between the celestial and terrestrial realms. Once the land was established, the Orisha descended in greater numbers to inhabit and organize this new world, each taking up residence in particular locations, establishing sacred groves and shrines, teaching humanity the arts of civilization, and among the most important tasks was the creation of human beings themselves, a work assigned to Obatala, the great sculptor. The Yoruba tradition tells how Obatala fashioned the first humans from clay, carefully molding their features, shaping their limbs, crafting each body with the patience and skill of a divine artist. And when the physical forms were complete, Olodumare breathed into them the breath of life, the divine essence that transforms clay into living being, matter into consciousness, sculpture into soul. This account of human creation from clay, animated by divine breath, presents an unmistakable parallel to the Sumerian narrative, where Enki fashions humanity from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god, a divine ingredient that gives humans their spark of divinity, their connection to the heavenly realm from which their creators came. Both traditions assert that humanity was deliberately created, not the result of accident or natural process, but the product of divine intention and craftsmanship. And both suggest that something of the divine was incorporated into human nature, that we carry within us a portion of heaven, a connection to our creators that sets us apart from all other earthly creatures. As we contemplate these two traditions, separated by thousands of miles, and, according to conventional history, developed in complete isolation from one another, we cannot help but notice the remarkable structural similarities that emerge. A supreme sky deity who delegates to a council of divine beings, those divine beings descending from heaven to earth, the establishment of a first and sacred city at the point of contact between realms, the creation of humanity from clay combined with divine essence, the organization of civilization through divine instruction and intervention. How shall we explain these parallels, these echoes that resonate across the vast distances of geography and culture and time? One explanation favored by many scholars is that these similarities reflect universal patterns of human thought, archetypes in the Jungian sense that emerge naturally from the structure of human consciousness. The tendency of all peoples to imagine sky fathers and divine councils, to explain their origins through stories of divine craftsmanship, to locate sacred centers where heaven and earth meet. Another possibility is that ancient trade routes and migrations carried ideas and stories across continents, that some cultural exchange occurred between Africa and the Middle East in prehistoric times, transmitting core mythological concepts that then developed independently in each location, taking on the unique characteristics of their new cultural homes while retaining underlying structural similarities. And there exists a third possibility, more speculative yet no less worthy of consideration, that both traditions preserve genuine memories of actual events, perhaps dimly remembered, certainly transformed by countless retellings over countless generations, but retaining at their core some true account of humanity's earliest history, of contact with beings who seem divine, of a time when heaven and earth were not so separate as they are today. We need not resolve this question tonight, for it may be a question that admits no final resolution, but we can hold it gently in our minds as we continue our exploration, allowing the mystery to remain mysterious, the wonder to remain wonderful, honoring both traditions for the profound wisdom they contain, regardless of how we explain their remarkable convergences. The Sumerians wrote their memories in clay, pressing reed into soft earth, creating permanent records that would survive for millennia beneath the sands of Mesopotamia, waiting for future generations to unearth them and learn what the ancients knew. The Yoruba wrote their memories in consciousness itself, in the living minds of priests and priestesses who dedicated their lives to memorizing vast bodies of sacred knowledge, passing these teachings from lip to ear across hundreds of generations, a chain of transmission more ancient and perhaps more reliable than any tablet or scroll. And both traditions tell us the same essential story, that we are not alone in this universe, that beings of great power and wisdom descended from the heavens to this earth, that they created us with purpose and intention, that they established sacred places where the divine and human worlds could meet, and that somewhere in our collective memory we retain the knowledge of these beginnings, encoded in myth and ritual and sacred verse, waiting for the moment when we are ready to remember. What if humanity's oldest stories are not myths at all, but memories, transformed and elaborated across the ages, yet retaining some fundamental truth about who we are and where we came from? This is the question that calls us forward, deeper into the parallels between these two great traditions, toward the specific correspondences between the Orisha and the Anunnaki, that suggests something more than coincidence, toward the living wisdom of the Ifa oracle that may preserve knowledge older than writing itself, toward the possibility that our ancestors remembered something extraordinary, something we have nearly forgotten, something that the ancient tablets of Sumer and the living tablets of Yoruba consciousness have preserved across the long ages for us to rediscover in our own time. Now we enter the heart of our exploration, where the parallels between these two ancient traditions become impossible to ignore, and where the divine counsels of both Yoruba and Sumerian cosmology reveal their remarkable correspondences. Let us begin with Ogun, the mighty Orisha of iron and war and civilization itself, for it is Ogun who cleared the path through the primordial wilderness so that the other Orisha could descend from heaven to earth. In Yoruba tradition, Ogun is the pathfinder, the one who goes before all others, wielding his machete to cut through the dense forest that once separated the realm of the gods from the realm of humanity. His sacred symbols tell us everything we need to know about his nature. Iron, that transformative metal that changed human history forever, belongs to Ogun. The number 7 is sacred to him. The dog, loyal and fierce, walks beside him. Ogun represents technology in its most fundamental sense, the power to transform raw nature into the tools of civilization. And he embodies creative destruction, the necessary breaking down that precedes all building up. Every blacksmith who ever heated iron in a forge was performing a ritual sacred to Ogun. Every road cut through the wilderness was a prayer to him. Every war fought for righteous cause invoked his name. Now consider Enlil, Lord of the Air in the Sumerian pantheon, the chief executive of the Anunnaki Council, who answered only to his father Anu in the celestial hierarchy. It was Enlil who performed one of the most consequential acts in Sumerian cosmology, the separation of heaven and earth, cleaving apart the primordial unity so that there would be space for life to exist, space for humanity to dwell. Before Enlil acted, there was no distinction between above and below, no room for the world we know. His act of separation was itself a kind of path clearing, a making of space where none existed before. And it was through the authority of Enlil that the Me were given to humanity, those divine laws and technologies that made civilization possible. The Me included everything from kingship to the arts of writing, from the techniques of building to the wisdom of judging truth from falsehood. Without the Me, humanity would have remained in a state of primitive wandering. With them, cities could rise and knowledge could accumulate across generations. Do you sense the pattern emerging? Both Ogun and Enlil are associated with establishing divine order on Earth. Both are connected to a primal masculine creative force that shapes the world through decisive action. Both are credited with giving humanity the essential tools and knowledge needed for civilization. The archetype of the divine civilizer appears in both traditions, wearing different names but performing the same cosmic function. This is not to say that Ogun and Enlil are the same being, but rather that both traditions remembered a type of divine figure, a god who cleared the way and gave the gifts that made human culture possible. Now let us turn our attention to a very different kind of divine power, the sacred feminine as embodied by Oshun of the Yoruba and Inanna of the Sumerians. Oshun is the Orisha of sweet waters, of love and fertility and prosperity. Her river flows through Nigeria to this day, the Osun River, and pilgrims still come to her waters seeking her blessings. Her symbols speak of sensual beauty and abundance. Honey, golden and sweet, belongs to Oshun. Gold itself, that metal of warmth and value, is sacred to her. Mirrors in which beauty contemplates itself are her instruments. The peacock, displaying its gorgeous feathers, moves under her protection. But do not mistake Oshun for mere ornament. In Yoruba cosmology, she holds a position of tremendous importance. When the original Orisha descended from heaven to earth, Oshun was among them. And some traditions say she was the only female divinity sent on that first mission. The male Orisha attempted their work without consulting her, and everything they tried failed. Only when they recognized Oshun's essential power, only when they gave her the respect she deserved, could the work of establishing heaven on earth proceed. She is the power without which all other powers are incomplete. Across the ancient world in Mesopotamia, we find Inanna, known also as Ishtar, goddess of love and fertility and war. Her story includes one of the oldest recorded narratives in human history, her descent to the underworld. Inanna, Queen of Heaven, chose to journey down through the 7 gates of the underworld, surrendering a piece of her regalia at each gate until she stood naked before her sister Ereshkigal, Queen of the Dead. She died in that dark realm and hung as a corpse on a hook for 3 days before being restored to life. This descent narrative prefigures so many later stories of death and resurrection, of the divine choosing to enter the realm of mortality. Inanna was also associated with the planet Venus, that brilliant light that appears as both morning star and evening star, always close to the sun, yet never consumed by it. Consider what these 2 goddesses share. Both embody sacred femininity in its fullest power, not passive or merely decorative, but active and essential. Both are associated with fertility and the waters that bring life. Both play crucial roles in descent narratives, Oshun descending with the original Orisha, Inanna descending through the 7 gates. Both are associated with beauty and love, yes, but also with a fierce protectiveness that can become terrible when roused. The divine feminine in both traditions serves as a bridge between heaven and earth, the power that makes connection possible, the love that spans the distance between realms. Oshun flows through Nigeria, her waters sweet and life-giving. Inanna descended through the 7 gates of the underworld. One moves across the earth, and one moves between worlds. Yet both embody the same truth, that divine love manifests through descent, through meeting humanity where it dwells. Now listen to the thunder rolling across the sky, and know that it speaks in a language older than any human tongue. In Yoruba tradition, that thunder is the voice of Shango, Orisha of lightning, and storms and divine justice. Shango occupies a unique position among the Orisha because he was once a human being, the 4th Alafin or king of the Oyo Empire, who ruled with such power and passion that after his death he was recognized as having been a god all along. His symbols pulse with energy and authority. The double-headed axe called Oshi Shango represents his power to strike in any direction. The ram embodies his masculine force and stubbornness in the face of opposition. The colors red and white, fire and purity, dress his altars and his devotees. Shango is the divine judge who cannot be deceived and whose punishments fall like lightning on the unjust. When storms roll across the land and thunder shakes the sky, the Yoruba know that Shango is speaking, that his eyes are watching, that his justice is awake. In ancient Mesopotamia, we find Adad, also known as Ishko, god of storms and rain. His thunderbolt and his bull were his emblems, power and fertility combined in a single divine figure. Like Shango, Adad controlled the weather and dispensed divine judgment through the storms he commanded. Kings sought his favor because his rains could bring abundant harvests, or his droughts could bring famine. He was associated with the authority of heaven made manifest on earth, the visible and audible proof that the gods were real and present and paying attention to human affairs. Thunder speaks the same language in every land. Shango's axe and Adad's bolt illuminate the same sky. Both figures are storm gods, as manifestations of divine power in their traditions. Thunder and lightning serve as the voice and weapon of heaven in both cosmologies. Both Shango and Adad are associated with justice and royal authority, the power that keeps order in the human world as storms keep order in the natural world. Both represent an archetype we might call the sky, God's powerful sun, the divine force that bridges the distant heavens and the immediate earth through dramatic displays of power. We come finally to what may be the most profound parallel of all, the divine creator who shaped humanity itself. In Yoruba tradition, this is Obatala, Orisha of creation and purity and wisdom. It was Obatala who received the commission from Olodumare, the supreme being, to create the physical forms of human beings. Working with sacred clay, Obatala sculpted the first humans, shaping our bodies with divine hands before Olodumare breathed life into them. Obatala is associated with white cloth, symbol of purity and peace. He represents creative wisdom, the patient intelligence that shapes formless matter into meaningful form. But there is a tender detail in Obatala's story that reveals much about his nature. The traditions say that while creating humans, Obatala drank palm wine and became intoxicated, and in that state he created some humans differently, with albinism or with what others might call disabilities. Rather than reject these creations, Obatala claimed them as specially his own, holding them in particular affection. Those born with albinism or differences are sacred to Obatala, protected by him, beloved of him. This is a God who loves his creation, not despite its variations, but with special tenderness for those who differ from the norm. In Sumerian tradition, we find Enki, god of wisdom and water and creation. The Sumerian texts tell us that it was Enki who proposed the creation of humanity and who performed the actual work of fashioning humans from clay mixed with divine blood. Enki is consistently portrayed as humanity's advocate and protector among the gods, the one who saved humanity from the flood by warning Ziusudra to build a boat, the one who argued for human well-being when other gods would have abandoned or destroyed us. His association with creative intelligence and compassion makes him perhaps the most human-friendly deity in the Sumerian pantheon. He is the god who cares what happens to his creation, who takes responsibility for what he has made. When Obatala shaped the first human from clay, when Enki mixed earth with divine blood, they performed the same sacred act. Creation is one. Only the words we use to describe it differ. Both figures are the actual creators of humanity in their traditions, the divine craftsmen whose hands shaped our physical forms. Both use clay or earth as the raw material of human creation, transforming the substance of the ground into vessels capable of holding consciousness. Both are associated with wisdom, patience, and protective care for the humans they created. Both embody the archetype of the divine craftsman, the God who does not merely command creation, but performs it, who does not abandon what he has made, but continues to care for it, who sees in humanity not servants or slaves, but beloved children worthy of protection. What are we to make of these parallels? We have now traced connections between four pairs of divine figures, Ogun and Enlil the civilizers, Oshun and Inanna, the divine feminine bridges, Shango and Adad the stormbringers, Obatala and Enki the creators of humanity. These are not vague similarities that might apply to any two religious systems. These are specific correspondences in function and symbol and cosmic role. Two ancient traditions separated by thousands of miles of ocean and desert, speaking unrelated languages, developing their cultures in apparently total isolation from each other, nonetheless remembered divine figures performing the same essential functions in the same cosmic drama. Perhaps these parallels arise from the structure of the human mind itself, from universal archetypes that emerge whenever humans contemplate the divine. Perhaps there were ancient connections between African and Mesopotamian civilizations that we have not yet discovered, trade routes and migrations that carried stories along with goods. Perhaps both traditions remember in their own ways something that actually happened, a time when beings from beyond our world walked among us and taught us the arts of civilization. We do not ask you to choose among these possibilities tonight. We ask only that you observe the patterns, that you wonder at the correspondences, that you consider the possibility that humanity's oldest memories, preserved in traditions across the world, may contain more truth than we have dared to believe. The Divine Council has met in many places and been called by many names. Perhaps it is one council. Perhaps it always was. When we speak of tablets, we often imagine clay pressed with wedge-shaped marks or stone carved with ancient symbols. Yet there exists another kind of tablet, one that requires no physical medium at all. And it is this form of preserved knowledge that may hold the deepest secrets of human memory. The Ifa divination system of the Yoruba people represents one of humanity's most extraordinary achievements in the preservation and transmission of knowledge. And in the year 2005, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization recognized Ifa as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. A designation that acknowledges what practitioners have known for countless generations, that within this system lies an entire universe of wisdom, encoded in patterns of sacred verse. To understand why we might call Ifa a tablet, we must first understand its structure. For this is no random collection of sayings or loosely gathered folklore, but rather a precisely organized corpus of knowledge divided into exactly 256 chapters known as Odu. And each of these Odu contains within it hundreds and in some cases thousands of individual verses called Iyesi. The mathematics alone stagger the mind, for if we consider that each Odu might contain anywhere from 400 to several thousand verses, we arrive at a total corpus that may encompass anywhere from 16,000 to over 100,000 distinct teachings, and this vast library of knowledge has been preserved not through writing, but through the disciplined practice of human memory, passed from teacher to student across generations beyond counting. In sacred groves throughout Yoruba land, and now across the world, wherever the diaspora has carried these traditions, there sit men known as Babalawo, which translates as Father of Secrets, and these men have dedicated their lives to the memorization and transmission of the Ifa corpus. The training of a Babalawo typically begins in childhood and continues for decades, with some practitioners studying for 20 or 30 years, before being considered masters of the system. And during this time, they must not merely memorize words, but internalize meanings, understand contexts, master the art of interpretation, and learn to access the right verse at the right moment when divination requires it. How is such a feat of memory possible? And more importantly, how has this knowledge remained stable across so many generations without the fixing power of written text? The answer lies in the nature of sacred oral transmission itself. For unlike casual storytelling, which drifts and changes with each telling, sacred verse is held to a different standard entirely, and the mechanisms that ensure its stability are both social and spiritual. When a young initiate learns a verse from his teacher, he does not merely hear it once and attempt to remember, but rather he recites it back and is corrected and recites again, and is corrected again, until the words emerge exactly as they were received. And this process of constant verification creates a self-correcting system that can actually be more stable than written records, which, once inscribed, may contain errors that perpetuate forever. The social dimension reinforces this stability, for the Babalawo does not practice in isolation, but within a community of fellow priests who know the same verses and can recognize when something has been altered, and the spiritual dimension adds another layer still. For the Babalawo believes that he is not merely reciting human words, but channeling divine knowledge, and to alter such knowledge would be a profound violation of sacred trust. Modern scholars who have studied oral traditions across cultures have found that sacred recitation can maintain remarkable stability across centuries, and in some documented cases, the same verses recorded by early ethnographers match almost exactly what practitioners recite today, generations later. So when we speak of tablets in the context of this documentary, we are not engaging in mere metaphor, but recognizing a different technology of preservation, one that uses the human mind and human community rather than clay or stone. And in many ways, this technology may be superior for clay. Tablets crumble, stone erodes, papyrus decays. But a living tradition that passes from mind to mind can theoretically persist forever, so long as the chain of transmission remains unbroken. What then do these living tablets contain, and why might their contents be relevant to our exploration of connections between Yoruba wisdom and the ancient narratives of Sumer? The Odu of Ifa contain nothing less than a complete worldview encompassing what we would today separate into distinct categories, such as history, mythology, philosophy, ethics, medicine, botany, astronomy, psychology, and social organization, but which the Yoruba understood as aspects of a single integrated knowledge system. Within the verses, we find stories of the creation of the world and the origins of humanity, and the descent of divine beings from heaven to earth. Stories that carry remarkable echoes of narratives we have explored from the Sumerian tradition. We find detailed knowledge of medicinal plants and healing practices that modern researchers have begun to validate, finding genuine pharmacological properties in substances long used by traditional practitioners. We find ethical teachings and social wisdom and psychological insights that reveal sophisticated understanding of human nature. And we find something else too, something that has drawn the attention of researchers interested in ancient knowledge systems. And that is astronomical information embedded within the sacred verses. The presence of astronomical knowledge in Ifa raises fascinating questions, for within the verses we find references to celestial bodies and cosmic cycles and the movements of heavenly objects. And while we must be careful not to overinterpret such references, some researchers have noted that the Yoruba cosmological system contains information that suggests careful observation of the sky over very long periods of time. The concept of multiple worlds or dimensions appears throughout Ifa, with the cosmos understood as comprising various realms, including the visible world of physical existence and invisible worlds inhabited by spirits, ancestors, and divine beings. And this multi-layered cosmology bears structural similarities to Mesopotamian concepts of cosmic geography with its heavens and earth and underworld. We might think here of the Dogon people of Mali, whose traditional knowledge has drawn attention for its apparent references to astronomical features that would seem to require telescopic observation to detect. though we must note that the Dogon case remains controversial, with some scholars arguing for ancient astronomical knowledge and others suggesting more recent transmission from European sources. What we can say with more confidence is that many African cultures, including the Yoruba, possessed sophisticated systems for tracking celestial cycles, and that these systems were deeply integrated with agricultural, religious, and social calendars. Now, let us turn our attention briefly to what we know of Sumerian astronomical knowledge, for the comparison illuminates both the sophistication of ancient observation and the questions that arise when we find similar knowledge in widely separated cultures. The Sumerians and their successors in Mesopotamia developed what may be the first systematic astronomy, leaving detailed records of their observations on clay tablets that have survived for millennia. They tracked the movements of the visible planets with remarkable precision and developed mathematical models for predicting celestial events, including eclipses and their base 60 number system, which gives us our 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles, reflects astronomical observations of the sky. Some interpreters of Sumerian texts, most notably Zechariah Sitchin, have argued that the astronomical knowledge of the Sumerians was too sophisticated to have developed through observation alone, and must have been given to them by the Anunnaki, who Sitchin interpreted as beings from another world. This interpretation remains highly controversial and is rejected by mainstream Sumerologists, but it raises a genuine question that does not depend on ancient astronaut theories. Namely, how did ancient peoples separated by vast distances come to possess similar astronomical knowledge, and what might this suggest about either cultural exchange or independent discovery, or perhaps something else entirely? When we place Yoruba astronomical references alongside Sumerian records, we find certain commonalities, including attention to specific celestial bodies, recognition of cosmic cycles, and integration of astronomical knowledge into religious and practical life. Multiple interpretations present themselves, and we should hold them all lightly, recognizing that certainty in these matters may be beyond our reach. Perhaps these similarities reflect independent development, as human communities everywhere looked to the same sky and drew similar conclusions from careful observation over generations. Perhaps ancient trade routes and population movements carried knowledge across vast distances in patterns we can no longer fully trace. Perhaps there existed in the deep past a common source civilization whose knowledge dispersed to various peoples who preserved fragments of it in their own traditions. Or perhaps, as some researchers suggest, there are other explanations involving forms of knowledge transmission that our current scientific paradigm does not yet accommodate. This brings us to perhaps the most speculative yet intriguing possibility we will explore tonight: the hypothesis that certain forms of knowledge might transmit not merely through culture, but through something deeper, through what various traditions have called ancestral memory, or what Carl Jung termed the collective unconscious. The Yoruba concept of Ori provides a framework for understanding this possibility, for Ori refers to the personal divine essence that each person carries, the inner head that connects the individual to spiritual reality and to the accumulated wisdom of ancestral lines. When a Babalawo accesses knowledge during divination, he is understood not merely to be recalling memorized verses, but to be opening a channel to ancestral wisdom, to connecting with the accumulated knowledge of all who have walked this path before him. The Sumerians possessed their own concept of transmitted divine essence in the form of the Ma, those mysterious divine powers or principles that were passed from the gods to humanity, and which encompassed everything from kingship to craftsmanship to the arts of civilization. If we step outside the frameworks of any particular tradition and ask whether modern science offers any support for the idea that memory or knowledge might transmit across generations through means other than direct teaching, we find ourselves in genuinely interesting territory. The field of epigenetics has revealed that life experiences can create chemical modifications to genes that may be passed to subsequent generations. And while the current evidence applies primarily to stress responses and basic behaviors, some researchers speculate that more complex information might also transmit through these or related mechanisms. This remains highly speculative, and we should not overstate the current scientific support for transgenerational memory transmission. But neither should we dismiss the possibility entirely. For science continues to reveal that biology is more complex than previous generations imagined, and mechanisms once considered impossible have repeatedly proven real. The psychologist Carl Jung proposed that beneath individual consciousness lies a collective unconscious shared by all humanity and containing archetypes that appear across cultures in remarkably similar forms. And, while Jung's theories remain debated, they offer a psychological framework for understanding how widely separated peoples might access similar symbolic and mythological content. Perhaps the tablets we have been seeking throughout this documentary are not tablets in any external sense at all, but rather tablets inscribed within us in the depths of human consciousness and human biology. Perhaps the Ifa corpus represents one people's extraordinary effort to externalize and systematize what exists latent within all human beings, namely a connection to ancestral knowledge that predates any writing system and any civilization we have yet discovered. Perhaps the similarities between Yoruba and Sumerian traditions reflect not cultural borrowing or ancient contact, but rather two different communities accessing the same deep reservoir of human memory and expressing what they found there in the languages and symbols available to them. If this is so, then the living tablets of Ifa take on even greater significance, for they represent not merely one culture's preserved wisdom, but a doorway into the collective memory of humanity itself, a technology for accessing knowledge that might otherwise remain buried in the depths of consciousness, unreachable by ordinary means. The Babalawo, sitting in his sacred grove, casting palm nuts upon the divination board, becomes not merely a priest of a particular tradition, but an archaeologist of consciousness, excavating layers of ancestral memory and bringing to light wisdom that predates the clay tablets of Sumer and the hieroglyphics of Egypt. Wisdom that may reach back to the very dawn of human awareness. We cannot prove these suggestions, and this documentary does not ask you to believe them without question, but we do invite you to consider them, to hold them as possibilities alongside the more conventional interpretations. What we can say with confidence is that the Yoruba people developed and have preserved against tremendous odds one of humanity's most sophisticated systems for encoding and transmitting knowledge across generations. We can say that this system contains material that bears striking similarities to content found in the ancient Near Eastern traditions we have explored. We can say that the mechanisms by which such similarities arise remain genuinely mysterious, and that multiple explanations remain possible, including explanations that challenge our conventional understanding of how knowledge moves through time and space. And we can say that if we approach these traditions with humility and genuine curiosity, they have much to teach us about the depths of human memory and the persistence of ancient wisdom in an age that too often imagines itself to have surpassed all that came before. The tablets are not lost. They were never lost. They are here among us, preserved in the living memory of traditional peoples, and perhaps inscribed more deeply still within the very fabric of what it means to be human. And so we arrive at the place where all paths converge, where the threads we have followed through ancient Sumer and sacred Isle If begin to weave themselves into a single tapestry. And we must ask ourselves what these remarkable parallels truly mean. For there are many ways to understand why two traditions separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years might tell such similar stories about the origins of humanity and the descent of divine beings from the heavens to the earth below. The first interpretation comes to us from the depth psychology of Carl Jung, who proposed that all human beings share a collective unconscious, a vast reservoir of primordial images and patterns that he called archetypes. And from this perspective, the parallels between Yoruba and Sumerian traditions are not evidence of contact or common source, but rather evidence of our shared humanity. For perhaps when any human culture gazes up at the stars and asks where we came from, the same images arise from the depths of the psyche. The same stories emerge because they are built into the very structure of human consciousness. The Creator God who shapes us from clay, the divine counsel that governs from above, the descent from heaven that brings wisdom and civilization. These may be the eternal patterns through which the human mind naturally interprets its existence. And there is beauty in this interpretation, for it suggests that we are all connected not through history, but through something even deeper, through the shared architecture of the soul itself. The second interpretation proposes that these parallels exist because of ancient cultural exchange along trade routes we have forgotten. For the Sahara was not always a desert, and there was a time when peoples could move more freely across the African continent and beyond, when ideas and stories traveled along with gold and salt and precious goods. And perhaps the ancestors of the Yoruba people encountered traditions that had originated in Mesopotamia, or perhaps both traditions drew from an earlier source in the Nile Valley or somewhere else entirely. And there is evidence that the ancient world was far more connected than we once believed, that ships sailed further and traders walked longer roads than our textbooks have told us. And from this perspective, the parallels are evidence of a forgotten chapter in human history, a time of exchange and influence that predates our written records. The third interpretation goes further still and proposes that somewhere in the deep past there existed a source civilization, perhaps one that preceded both Sumer and the Yoruba kingdoms by many thousands of years. A civilization whose influence spread across the ancient world and whose memory is preserved in fragmented form in the traditions of many peoples. And those who hold this view point to the mysterious sophistication of ancient knowledge, to the precision of monuments built in an age we consider primitive, to the astronomical wisdom encoded in myths and sacred calendars around the world. And they suggest that we have forgotten more than we remember, that human civilization may be far older than we know, and that the parallels we observe are echoes of this forgotten source. And then there is the fourth interpretation the one that has captured the imagination of millions, which proposes that these stories preserve a memory of actual events, that beings did indeed descend from somewhere beyond the earth, that the Anunnaki of Sumerian tradition and the Orisha of Yoruba cosmology may represent memories of the same visitors, the same intervention in human affairs, the same gift of knowledge and civilization. And this interpretation asks us to consider that our ancestors were not merely spinning tales, but were recording their experience as best they could, using the language and concepts available to them. Now, we must be honest with you as we approach the end of this journey together, for we cannot prove which of these interpretations is correct. And this documentary does not claim to have solved the mystery that scholars and seekers have pondered for generations. Each interpretation has its strengths and each has its limitations. The archetypal view explains the parallels but does not account for the specific and detailed correspondences. The cultural exchange view is plausible but lacks definitive archaeological evidence for contact between these particular traditions. The source civilization theory is intriguing but remains speculative, and the ancient astronaut hypothesis, whatever one thinks of it, cannot be proven with the evidence currently available to us, and perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain open, not because the truth does not exist, but because the seeking itself has value, because the questions we ask about our origins shape who we become, because wonder is its own reward. What we can say with certainty is this: the Yoruba tradition does not require any external validation to prove its worth and sophistication. For too long, the wisdom traditions of Africa have been dismissed, ignored, or treated as primitive superstitions by scholars who could not see past their own cultural biases. And whatever the source of the parallels we have explored tonight, the Ifa corpus stands as one of humanity, great intellectual and spiritual achievements, a vast library of wisdom preserved not in stone or clay, but in living memory, passed down through countless generations by men and women who dedicated their lives to the sacred task of remembering. The Babalawo who sits today beneath the Iroku tree and recites the verses of the Odu is the inheritor of a tradition that may well be older than the pyramids, older than Sumer itself, and this tradition deserves our respect and attention on its own terms, not because it confirms or connects to anything else, but because it represents the profound capacity of the human spirit to seek meaning, to preserve wisdom, to maintain connection with the sacred across the vast stretches of time. And perhaps what matters most is not whether the Anunnaki were real in the literal sense, not whether beings from beyond the stars actually walked the earth in ancient times, but rather what these traditions together tell us about ourselves and our place in the cosmos. For whether we interpret these stories as myth or memory or something in between, they encode certain truths that speak to the deepest questions of human existence. Both traditions tell us that we are not accidents, that humanity was created with purpose and intention, that we carry within us something of the divine. Both traditions tell us that wisdom is a gift, something that was given to us by forces greater than ourselves, and that we bear responsibility for how we use that gift. Both traditions tell us that heaven and earth are meant to be in relationship, that the sacred realm above and the material realm below are not separate but interconnected, and that our lives have meaning precisely because they participate in this cosmic relationship. and in an age when many have lost connection with any sense of the sacred. When the universe seems cold and random and indifferent to human existence, these ancient teachings offer something precious, a different way of understanding who we are and why we are here. The Yoruba tradition is not a relic of the past, but a living wisdom that continues to guide millions of people today, in Nigeria and Benin, in Cuba and Brazil, in Trinidad and Haiti, in cities across Europe and America. The Orisha are still honored. Ifa divination still guides communities through their challenges. The wisdom of the ancestors still speaks through those trained to hear it. The tradition has survived the transatlantic slave trade. It has survived colonialism and missionary suppression. It has survived the contempt of those who considered it primitive. And it has not merely survived, but flourished, adapting to new contexts while maintaining its essential core. And this survival itself is evidence of the tradition's power and truth. For wisdom that endures across such trials must contain something genuine, something that speaks to authentic human need, something that works. And so we come to the invitation that this documentary offers, not a demand that you believe any particular interpretation, not a claim that we have solved ancient mysteries or decoded forgotten secrets, but simply an invitation to wonder, to remain curious, to approach the wisdom of our ancestors with humility and openness, rather than dismissal or certainty. For we live in an age that often mistakes information for knowledge and knowledge for wisdom. An age that has gained much, but has also lost something precious. The capacity to sit in mystery, to honor what we do not understand, to listen for truths that cannot be measured or proven, but can only be recognized in the quiet of the heart. Our ancestors, whether in Africa or Mesopotamia or anywhere else on this earth, were not fools. They were not simply making up stories to explain what their primitive minds could not understand. They were engaging with the deepest questions of existence, and they preserved their insights in the forms available to them, in myth and ritual, in sacred verse and divination, in traditions passed from generation to generation with reverent care. And if we approach their legacy with the respect it deserves, we may find that they have something to teach us still. Not facts to add to our databases, but wisdom to transform our understanding, not answers to close our questions, but openings to deepen them. What might we learn if we truly listened to the ancestors? If we set aside our assumption that we in our modern age have surpassed all that came before? If we considered the possibility that certain kinds of knowledge have been lost rather than gained as the centuries have passed, the Babalawo still remembers. The verses of the Odu still speak. The Orisha still answer those who approach them with sincerity. And perhaps the message they carry is the same message encoded in those ancient Sumerian tablets, the same message that human beings in every age and place have needed to hear. You are not alone. You were never alone. You are part of something vast and purposeful and sacred. Heaven knows your name. Heaven has always known your name. And whatever you believe about the literal truth of ancient stories, this message itself is worth receiving, worth contemplating, worth allowing to settle into the depths of your being as the night grows quiet and sleep approaches. For you are the inheritor of all this wisdom, the descendant of all these ancestors, the continuation of all these traditions, and something in you recognizes what something in them knew, that we are more than we appear to be, that our origins are more mysterious than we remember, that the story of humanity is not finished, but continues even now, even in this moment, even in you. And so we arrive at the end of our journey together, having travelled across continents and millennia, from the ancient marshlands of Sumer, where the first scribes pressed their reeds into wet clay, to the sacred groves of Nigeria, where the Babalawo still sit beneath ancient trees and speak the words their ancestors spoke before them. We have walked between two worlds that perhaps were never truly separate, observing the remarkable parallels that emerge when we place these traditions side by side. The Anunnaki descending from heaven to establish the first cities, the Orisha descending on golden chains to bring order to the primordial earth, Enki shaping humanity from clay and divine essence, Obatala sculpting the first bodies with his patient and loving hands, Inanna moving between worlds as the embodiment of sacred love, Oshun flowing through her rivers as the sweet water that makes all life possible, Shango wielding his thunderbolt as the voice of divine justice, Adad commanding the storms that remind humanity of powers greater than themselves. These parallels do not demand that we choose one explanation over another. Perhaps they arose independently from the deep wells of human consciousness, universal patterns that emerge whenever human beings contemplate their origins and their relationship with the cosmos. Perhaps ancient trade routes carried these stories across deserts and seas, travelers sharing wisdom around countless campfires over thousands of years. Perhaps there was once a common source, a mother civilization whose memory fractured and scattered across the world. Or perhaps, as some have dared to suggest, these traditions preserve an actual memory of contact between humanity and beings from beyond our world. We do not need to resolve this mystery tonight. Indeed, the beauty of mystery is that it invites us to remain curious, to keep seeking, to approach the unknown with wonder rather than frustration. What we can say with certainty is that these traditions, both Sumerian and Yoruba, represent extraordinary achievements of human consciousness. They are not primitive superstitions, but sophisticated attempts to make meaning of existence, to locate humanity within the vast architecture of the cosmos, to remember something essential about who we are and where we came from. The Ifa tradition especially deserves our profound respect, for it has accomplished something remarkable. It has preserved thousands upon thousands of verses across centuries, without the aid of writing, passing this knowledge from teacher to student in an unbroken chain that stretches back beyond the reach of recorded history. This is a feat of memory and devotion that should humble anyone who believes that technological civilization represents the pinnacle of human achievement. The Babalawo, who sit today in Nigeria, in Brazil, in Cuba, in communities across the world, are not relics of the past, but living links to wisdom that our modern world desperately needs. They remind us that knowledge can be transmitted through consciousness itself, that the most important truths are often carried in the heart rather than carved in stone. And now, as the night deepens around you and sleep begins to soften the edges of waking awareness, consider this. Many traditions across the world speak of dreams as doorways. The Yoruba understand that in sleep, the Ori, your personal divine essence, can travel and receive guidance. The ancients of many lands believed that the ancestors speak most clearly when the noise of daily life falls silent. Tonight, you carry these stories with you into sleep. The images of descending gods and sacred cities, of thunder deities and love goddesses, of clay shaped by divine hands and breath that carries the spark of heaven. These are not merely entertainment. They are seeds planted in the fertile soil of your dreaming mind. Who knows what may grow from them? Who knows what memories may surface when you release the grip of waking consciousness and allow older, deeper parts of yourself to speak? You are not separate from these ancient mysteries. This is perhaps the most important truth we can offer as this journey draws to its close. You are not watching these traditions from outside. You are their continuation. Every human being alive today carries the genetic inheritance of ancestors who sat around fires and told stories about where they came from. Every one of us has within us the same capacity for wonder, the same longing to understand, the same intuition that there is more to existence than what meets the eye. In your breath moves the same breath that Obatala breathed into the first human forms. In your blood flows the same life force that the Anunnaki was said to have mingled with the clay of earth. You are the living proof that those ancient stories, whatever their ultimate origin, contain a truth that has survived every catastrophe, every empire, every attempt to silence the old ways. The tablets of clay may crumble, the tablets of memory endure. Somewhere within you, the ancient stories still live, waiting for the quiet moment when you are ready to hear them. Perhaps tonight will be that moment. We offer our deepest gratitude to the wisdom keepers who have preserved these traditions against all odds, the Babalawo and priests and priestesses who have devoted their lives to ensuring that the ancient knowledge survives into the future. We thank the scholars who have worked to decipher the cuneiform tablets and make the wisdom of Sumer accessible to the modern world. We thank the communities who continue to practice these living traditions, keeping the Orisha alive in their hearts and their rituals. And we thank you for your attention, for your openness, for your willingness to journey with us through these sacred territories. Our hope is modest. We do not claim to have proven anything or solved any ancient mysteries. We hope only that we have inspired a little more curiosity about these remarkable traditions, a little more respect for the wisdom of our ancestors, a little more wonder at the extraordinary tapestry of human seeking across the ages. And now, let the night receive you. Let your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts grow soft. The stars that shine above you tonight are the same stars that the Sumerians watched from their ziggurat towers, the same stars the Yoruba navigators read as they traveled the ancient world. You rest beneath the same sky that has witnessed the entire human story, every joy and sorrow, every question and discovery, every dream that has ever risen from a sleeping mind. Rest now, child of heaven and earth. You have listened well. You have honored the ancestors with your attention. May your sleep be deep and dreamless, or may your dreams carry you to places where the ancient ones still walk and the old wisdom flows like living water. The ancestors watch over your dreaming. They have always watched. They always will. In the great chain of memory that connects all generations, you are held, you are known, you are never alone. Sleep well. The mystery will be here when you wake, patient and beautiful, waiting for you to continue the eternal exploration whenever you are ready. Until then, peace, deep peace of the running wave to you, deep peace of the flowing air to you, deep peace of the quiet earth to you, deep peace of the shining stars to you, deep peace of the watching ancestors to you. Sleep now. All is well. All has always been well. All will be well. The journey continues in dreams.